My name is Willow Sinclair, and at 30 years old, I learned that truth is not a gentle stream that trickles into the light. It is a raging flood that obliterates the landscape of lies. It doesn't just cleanse, it carves new, terrifying canyons and demolishes the dams of denial and fear built over generations. The final, deliberate act of pressing the send button on an email felt less like a conscious choice and more like a biological imperative, a final, desperate breath held for an entire lifetime of placation, finally and violently exhaled into the unsuspecting world. The silence that followed was not empty. It was a humming, vibrating vacuum, pregnant with the terrifying potential of the hurricane I had just unleashed upon my own family. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, bathed in the cold, sterile glow of my laptop screen, a stark, modern monolith against the profound, ancient darkness that had systematically consumed our lives since that day at Willowbrook Manor. To understand the email, you must first understand the moment it was born. It happened during the annual Sinclair family gathering at Willowbrook Manor, an event that was less a celebration of family and more a mandatory performance of unity. The manor itself was a character in our drama, a sprawling Gothic revival estate with dark oak paneling that seemed to absorb all light and sound, ancestral portraits whose eyes followed you with stern disapproval, and a suffocating air of inherited wealth and deep-seated dysfunction. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the scent of beeswax, old money, and dying hydrangeas my mother insisted on arranging in massive funereal urns. The oppressive weight of history and expectation was a physical presence in every room. We were 20 strong around the long, polished mahogany dining table. The heavy, ornate silver felt cold and weapon-like in my hands. The crystal glasses shimmered, reflecting the distorted faces of a family pretending to like each other. The conversation was a carefully curated symphony of superficialities. Sterling, my father, holding court at the head of the table, boasting about a recent hostile acquisition, his voice booming with a self-satisfaction that tolerated no interruption. Vivian, my mother, was seated to his right, a queen consort in her element, dissecting the perceived fashion failures of a mutual acquaintance with surgical precision. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins murmured about stock portfolios, private school admissions, and their latest trip to the Hamptons. It was the Sinclair way, polished, performative, and utterly devoid of genuine connection. My younger cousins, products of the same emotionally sterile environment, were glued to their phones, their faces illuminated by the eerie blue light, already bored with the adult world of posturing and veiled insults. My daughter, Alara, a splash of vibrant life in her bright pink dress, was a stark contrast to the muted, predatory tones of the adults. She was a wildflower that had somehow bloomed in a meticulously manicured but toxic garden. She had been a model of good behavior throughout the stilted three-course meal, her small feet swinging gently beneath her high-backed chair, her eyes wide with the effort of staying quiet. But after a dessert of chocolate mousse, the sugar and a 6-year-old's pure ebullience kicked in. She began to sing. It was a silly, nonsensical song from a popular children's cartoon about a magical creature. A little off-key, but radiating a pure, unadulterated happiness that felt like a profound rebellion in that cavernous, joyless room. At first, it was ignored, treated like the buzzing of a fly that would eventually go away. Then came the annoyed glances, the subtle tightening of jaws around the table. Grant, my uncle, sitting near the head of the table beside my father, shot me a look of pure irritation, his handsome face twisting into a mask of displeasure. He held his wineglass with a white-knuckled intensity that betrayed the rage simmering just beneath his bespoke suit. "Willow, can you get her under control?" he said, his voice a low hiss that cut through the low murmur of conversation. It wasn't a request, it was a command, issued from a place of absolute authority, the voice of a man who had never been told no. "She's just happy, Grant," I murmured, my own voice barely audible, already conditioned by a lifetime of placating the volatile men in my family. I placed a hand on Alara's shoulder. Alara, sweetie, maybe a little quieter. Indoor voice. But Alara, caught up in her own world of song, simply took my touch as encouragement. She beamed at me, her face a picture of pure innocence, and her volume increased, her voice ringing with a delightful, defiant clarity that filled the hall. "A rainbow pony flies so high," she belted out, giggling as she reached the chorus, her eyes sparkling with a magic that the rest of the room had long since forgotten. That was it, the breaking point. In a flash of movement that was both shockingly fast and seemed to happen in surreal slow motion, Grant was out of his chair. He didn't yell, he didn't warn. He crossed the space between them in two long, predatory strides. I saw it coming a second before it happened, a moment of nightmarish clarity where my body was frozen, but my mind screamed. His face was a mask of cold, controlled rage, the face of a bully who had found his target. He reached out, his hand a blur, and brought it down across Alara's face. The crack of his palm against her cheek echoed like a gunshot. It was a sound so sharp, so violent, it seemed to sever the fabric of reality. The singing stopped instantly, replaced by Alara's sharp, terrified gasp, a sound that sucked all the air and warmth out of the grand hall. Her head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, and a bright red handprint began to bloom on her pale skin like a brand. Her wide blue eyes, swimming with shock and a dawning, profound horror, filled with tears that spilled silently down her cheeks. She didn't make a sound, her small body frozen in a state of pure terror, her joy extinguished as if by a switch. A disorienting, absolute quiet fell over the entire family. No one moved, no one spoke. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, silent beating of my own heart. It was a silence thick with shock, cowardice, and the rotten stench of unspoken complicity. In that moment, I saw them all for who they were, a gallery of well-dressed, soulless statues, accessories to an act of casual brutality. And then, the sounds that sealed their fate, the sounds that would become the heart of the Crestwood tapes. My father, Sterling, seated at the head of the table like a king on his throne, broke the silence. He let out a low, approving chuckle, a rumbling sound of satisfaction from deep in his chest. "About time someone did that," he grunted, taking a slow, deliberate sip of his Cabernet, as if he had just witnessed an amusing party trick. "Kid needs to learn respect." My mother, Vivian, seated to his right, added her own endorsement, a brittle, dismissive laugh, like ice cracking on a frozen pond. "Well," Vivian trilled, her voice dripping with a casual, reptilian cruelty as she looked at my weeping, humiliated daughter, who was now trying to shrink into herself, to disappear. "Well, she needed to learn shame. She can't be the center of attention all the time. There's nothing worse than a child with no sense of propriety. Thank you, Grant. Willow is too soft." I snatched Alara out of her chair, my body moving on pure, primal instinct, a wave of adrenaline washing away a lifetime of fear and deference. "Don't you ever touch her again," I snarled at Grant, my voice a venomous whisper I didn't recognize as my own. His face was unrepentant, a mask of cold fury and entitlement. He simply sneered, looking down his nose at me as if I were something he'd scraped off his shoe. "She needed to be disciplined. You're raising a brat, and it's an embarrassment." I fled the room, Alara's silent, convulsive sobs shaking her small body against my chest. No one followed. No one called out my name. As I reached the grand staircase, I could hear the conversation resuming behind me. The clinking of silverware against china, the only sound as they closed ranks around the abuser, leaving the victim and her protector cast out into the cold. That night, clutching my daughter in a guest room that felt like a prison cell, listening to the faint sounds of laughter and cigar smoke from downstairs, the plan began to form. It was no longer about escaping. It was about razing the entire corrupt structure to the ground. The days following our escape from Willowbrook Manor were a suffocating fog of trauma and brewing rage. We returned to our small two-bedroom apartment in the city, a space that had once felt like a cozy sanctuary, but now felt like a bunker. My world shrank to the size of these rooms, my existence dedicated to a single, all-consuming task, tending to the ghost of my daughter. Alara's vibrant, technicolor spirit had been replaced by a silent, grayscale version of herself. The girl who once narrated her every thought, who sang while she brushed her teeth, who giggled in her sleep, was now hauntingly quiet. She moved through the apartment like a wraith, her small shoulders perpetually hunched, her eyes wide and scanning every corner as if expecting a threat to emerge from the walls. She refused to sing. She even refused to hum. Music on the radio would make her flinch and cover her ears. The silence she left in her wake was a roaring testament to what had been stolen. Her trauma manifested in other ways, too. She developed a pronounced startle reflex, a dropped spoon, a door slamming in the hallway, the blare of a distant siren. Any sudden noise would send her into a state of trembling panic, her breath catching in her throat. At night, the terrors came, and I would be woken by her muffled screams. I would rush into her room to find her sitting bolt upright in bed, drenched in a cold sweat, her eyes wide with an unseeing horror as she relived the incident in the torture chamber of her own mind. I would hold her for hours, rocking her back and forth, whispering assurances that she was safe, that I would never let anyone hurt her again. But my words felt like flimsy shields against an immense, invisible monster. During this time, I ignored the incessant calls from my mother. They started as saccharine, manipulative messages about smoothing things over and not letting a little misunderstanding ruin the family. When I didn't respond, they became more demanding, filled with accusations of my being dramatic and hysterical. I deleted every voicemail without listening to the end. My father, Sterling, called only once, a short, barking command to stop this foolishness and apologize to Grant. I hung up on him mid-sentence. They simply could not, comprehend the line that had been crossed. In their world, the family's image was paramount, and a child's spirit was an acceptable sacrifice to maintain it. My only communication was with my Uncle Arthur. He had called the day after, his voice thick with shame and regret. He was the one who, a week later, quietly dropped off a small encrypted USB drive. "I don't know what you're going to do with this, Willow," he had said, his eyes avoiding mine. "But you deserve to have it. The truth deserves to exist." That USB drive became my nightly ritual. Once Alara was finally settled into a fitful sleep, I would retreat to my living room, the city lights a distant, indifferent glitter outside my window. I bought a pair of professional-grade noise-canceling headphones, creating an isolated auditory chamber for myself. I would plug in the drive, open the folder, and press play on the 45-second audio file. The first time I listened, it was a physical blow. I threw up in the kitchen sink. But I forced myself to return. Night after night, I listened. I wasn't just hearing it anymore. I was dissecting it, studying it, letting the pure, undistilled poison of it burn away any lingering sentimentality, any vestige of filial duty, any shred of doubt about what I had to do. I listened to the innocent joy in Alara's voice. I listened to the cold irritation in Grant's. I listened to the sickening crack of the slap, a sound I could now anticipate with a flinch that racked my entire body. Most importantly, I listened to the aftermath, the satisfied, guttural chuckle from my father and the sharp, brittle laugh from my mother. Those two sounds were the key. They transformed the incident from a singular act into a revelation of systemic, generational rot. This nightly self-flagellation forged my resolve into something cold, hard, and unbreakable. I duplicated the file, creating backups. I named the final master file the Crestwood Tapes, after the street the manor was on, a final bitter irony, a title for a horror film that was all too real. During the day, while Alara was at a preschool she now attended with a silent reluctance, I became a strategist. The grieving, terrified mother receded, and a cold, calculating avenger took her place. I channeled my fury into meticulous, obsessive research. I worked from a corner of my apartment, my laptop my command center. I built a digital dossier on Grant, mapping his professional universe with the precision of a military planner. Using public records, LinkedIn, and corporate websites, I identified the entire board of directors at Apex Strategies Group, their executive assistants, and, through industry publications, a list of their top 10 highest value clients. I compiled their email addresses, their office numbers, and even the names of their spouses and the charities they publicly supported. I did the same for the Viridian Youth Alliance, noting not just their board members, but their major corporate and private donors. I understood that for an organization like that, the perception of integrity was their only real currency. My goal was not just to attack Grant, but to poison the ecosystem that allowed him to thrive, to make him radioactive to the very institutions that gave him legitimacy. I created 3 separate anonymous email accounts, routing them through encrypted servers in different countries, learning basic digital hygiene from online privacy forums. This methodical, obsessive work kept me from shattering completely. It gave my pain a purpose, a direction. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only comfort I had. Finally, after 2 weeks of planning, the day came. Alara was asleep, the apartment was quiet. The Crestwood tapes were loaded as an attachment. The list of recipients was pasted into the BCC field, a list of nearly 100 influential people in Grant's world. I took a deep breath and wrote the subject line, a masterpiece of understated menace, regarding the true character of Grant Ashworth. My finger hovered over the send button for a long time. This was the point of no return. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my own life, and the shrapnel would hit everyone, including myself and Alara. I thought of her small, silent face, of the light that had gone out in her eyes. I thought of my mother's laugh, and with a sense of absolute, chilling certainty, I pressed down. The email vanished from my outbox into the digital ether. A strange calm settled over me. The waiting was over. The speaking had begun. The first ripple of the earthquake I had triggered did not register in a corporate boardroom, but in the sterile, silent expanse of a minimalist mansion in Westchester. Serafina Rhodes, my uncle's wife, was arranging a single glödbröd amphorium in a tall glass vase, a task she performed with the detached precision of a surgeon. Her home, a sprawling structure of glass, white marble, and stark concrete, was less a home and more a museum exhibit titled A Successful Man's Life. It was beautiful, impeccably designed, and utterly devoid of warmth. For 10 years, Serafina had existed as its curator, another perfect object within its walls. She had long ago suppressed the quiet, gnawing feeling of dissatisfaction, the sense that her own vibrant personality had been sanded down and lacquered over to better match the decor. Her phone buzzed on the marble countertop. It was a message from Grant's executive assistant, a young, hyper-efficient woman named Chloe. "Hi, Serafina. Very strange and frankly disturbing email making the rounds here. It's being sent to board members. I don't know what to make of it, but thought Grant would want you to see it immediately. He's in meetings all day." Attached was the email I had sent. Serafina's first instinct was one of wifely duty, to protect Grant. She assumed it was a disgruntled ex-employee or a failed business rival engaging in a smear campaign. She opened the email, her expression a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. The subject line, regarding the true character of Grant Ashworth, was certainly dramatic. She saw the attached audio files, the Crestwood tapes, and felt a prickle of unease. With a sigh, she walked to her home office, a room as sparsely furnished as the rest of the house, and clicked on the first file. Her laptop speakers were muted, as always, so nothing happened. Annoyed, she plugged in the sleek, silver headphones Grant had bought her for Christmas. She placed them over her ears, the plush leather cups blocking out the oppressive silence of the house, and clicked play again. The sound that filled her head was shockingly clear. First, the cheerful, off-key singing of a little girl. Serafina smiled faintly, recognizing Alara's sweet voice from the unbearable family gathering. Then, she heard her husband's voice, cold and sharp. And then, the slap. It was so visceral, so real, that Serafina physically recoiled, ripping the headphones from her ears as if they were on fire. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. It couldn't be real. It had to be a fabrication, a clever fake. Grant had a temper. Yes, she knew that better than anyone. She had been on the receiving end of his verbal tirades, had seen him throw a golf club into a water hazard, had learned to navigate his moods like a sailor in a storm. But this was different. This was violence against a child. With a trembling hand, she put the headphones back on. She had to be sure. She listened again, forcing herself to get past the slap. She heard Alara's terrified gasp. And then she heard the other voices, the ones that shattered her world far more completely than the sound of the blow itself. She heard Sterling's satisfied chuckle, a sound she had always associated with a stock tip paying off. And then she heard her mother-in-law, Vivian, her own role model of poise and social grace, laugh. She needed to learn shame. In that moment, 10 years of denial crumbled into dust. Every excuse she had ever made for Grant, every time she had rationalized his behavior as stress or passion, every time she had swallowed her own anger to keep the peace, all of it was revealed as a pathetic lie. The problem wasn't Grant's temper. The problem was his soul. And the soul of the family she had married into was a rotten, cavernous thing. She stumbled to the bathroom and was violently sick. Afterward, shaking and pale, she knew there was only one person she could talk to. She found my number and made the call, her fingers fumbling with the screen. That hours-long conversation with me wasn't a discussion. It was a confession, an unburdening, a desperate plea for validation from the only other person who knew the truth. When she hung up, the sun was setting, casting long, menacing shadows across her perfect, empty house. She knew what she had to do. She waited. She sat on a white leather sofa, perfectly still, as the hours ticked by. When Grant came home around 8 p.m., whistling, tossing his briefcase onto a chair, she was ready. "Rough day, babe?" he asked, loosening his tie. She looked at him, her face a pale, determined mask. "I heard it, Grant." "Heard what?" he asked, suddenly wary as he saw her expression. "The recording. From Willowbrook. I was forwarded the email that's circulating at Apex, the one titled, 'Regarding the True Character of Grant Ashworth.' I heard what you did to Alara. I heard your father laugh." His face transformed instantly, the charming mask dropping to reveal the cold, reptilian fury beneath. "That bitch," he hissed. "That unstable, jealous bitch. She's trying to ruin me. It's a fake, Serafina. A deep fake, obviously. You can't possibly believe that garbage." "I heard your voice, Grant," she said, her own voice quiet but unshakable, a strange new strength flowing through her. "I heard Vivian's. There's no faking that kind of cruelty. There's no faking the sound of a hand hitting a child's face." He tried everything in his manipulator's toolbox. First, rage. He launched the heavy crystal tumbler of scotch he was holding against the wall, where it shattered, spraying amber liquid and glass shards across the pristine white paint. "How dare you accuse me, after everything I've given you? This house, your clothes, your entire life," he screamed, his face purple. She didn't flinch. When that didn't work, he switched to pleading. He fell to his knees, crawling towards her, crying crocodile tears about the pressure he was under, how he'd just snapped, how he loved her and would do anything to make it right. "I'm not a monster, baby. You know I'm not. I lost control for a second. It will never happen again, I swear to you." Finally, he tried threats. He stood up, towering over her. "You think you can leave me? You signed a prenup, Serafina. You'll walk away with nothing. You'll be nothing without me. I'll tell everyone you're crazy, that you're the one who is abusive. I will destroy you." But for the first time, she was immune. The audio had been an antidote to his poison. She stood up and looked down at him, not with fear, but with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You already are nothing, Grant," she said, her voice clear and cold. "You're just a hollow man in an expensive suit. Keep the house. I don't want it. It's just a beautiful cage." The next morning, while he was at work frantically trying to manage the crisis, Serafina's movers arrived. They worked with quiet efficiency, packing only her personal belongings, her clothes, her books, her art. She left behind the jewelry, the cars, the entire life he had bought for her. When they were done, she walked through the silent, echoing house one last time. On the marble kitchen island, she left her wedding and engagement rings, a glittering pile next to a single handwritten note. It said, "I've gone to find my voice again." Then she walked out the door and never looked back. A week later, her lawyer served Grant with divorce papers. The first, most personal domino had fallen. While Serafina was orchestrating her quiet rebellion, the digital bomb I had detonated was ripping through the pristine, climate-controlled corridors of corporate power. At Apex Strategies Group, the email landed like a biohazard in the executive suite. My sympathetic contact in the legal department, a sharp, ambitious woman named Anya, who had long despised Grant's arrogance, later gave me a detailed, almost gleeful account of the implosion. An emergency partners-only board meeting was convened in the top-floor, soundproofed boardroom, a chamber of glass and steel known internally as the Cathedral, which overlooked the city like the domain of a vengeful god. The 7 board members filed in, their faces grim. At the head of the massive granite table sat Marcus Thorne, the CEO, a man whose resting face was a mask of predatory impatience. To his right was Cynthia Davies, the general counsel, a woman with piercing intelligence and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Opposite her was Julian Croft, the head of public relations, a perpetually anxious man who already looked like he hadn't slept in days. Also present was Robert Vance, an older board member from a rival firm, a longtime golfing buddy of Sterling's, who seemed more annoyed than concerned. Marcus wasted no time on pleasantries. "You all received the email," he stated, his voice flat. "For the record, we are going to listen to the audio attachment together." He gestured to his IT aide, who tapped a key on a laptop connected to the room's state-of-the-art sound system. The sound that filled the acoustically perfect room was shockingly intimate and clear. First, Alara's sweet, innocent singing, then Grant's cold command, and then the slap. It was so crisp and loud in the silent room that Julian Croft physically jumped in his seat. The sound of Alara's gasp was followed by the 2 damning affirmations, Sterling's chuckle and Vivian's laugh. The audio ended. Marcus let the silence hang in the air for a full 10 seconds, his eyes scanning the face of each person at the table. Cynthia Davies, the lawyer, was the first to speak, her voice as clipped and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "Legally, this is a nightmare. The act itself is assault, but the context, the parental approval, makes it a character issue that is systemic and indefensible. From a corporate governance standpoint, he represents a clear and present danger to this firm's reputation and financial stability. This is a catastrophic liability. Julian Croft, the PR head, was frantically scribbling on a legal pad, his face pale. Liability? Cynthia, this is an extinction-level event for his career, and it will be for us if we mishandle it. The Viridian Youth Alliance is on the first page of his corporate bio. We have corporate responsibility partnerships with 3 different children's charities. If this gets out, the headline writes itself. Apex partner who beats children? We're not just finished, we're a case study in corporate malfeasance for the next decade. Robert Vance, Sterling's friend, attempted a weak defense, his voice blustering. Now, let's not overreact. It was a family matter, a disciplinary tap. The girl was apparently out of control. We can't destroy a 30-year career over some family squabble sent in by a person who is clearly unstable. Cynthia Davies fixed him with a stare of pure ice that could have frozen lava. Did you hear the audio, Robert? That wasn't a tap. The sound of the impact is acoustically unambiguous. And even if it were, did you hear the father's chuckle? This isn't about discipline. This is about a culture of cruelty, and he is its smiling representative. The market will not forgive this. Our clients, especially those with public-facing brands, will not forgive this. The optics are, and I use this word precisely, fatal. Marcus Thorne, who had been listening intently, finally spoke, his voice low and decisive, the voice of a man signing a death warrant. He's a cancer, a stage 4 liability. We don't treat it, we cut it out before it metastasizes. Effective immediately, Grant Ashworth is suspended. His access to all company systems, buildings, and accounts is revoked. Security is on their way to his office now to box up his personal effects. He is not to communicate with any employee or client on behalf of this firm. He turned to his team. Julian, you will draft a tight, no-comment holding statement about an internal review into a confidential personnel matter. Not one word more. Cynthia, I want your team to run a full risk assessment and find out who sent this. Not to punish them, he added with a cold smile, but to understand the threat. Find out what they want. This is damage control, people, pure and simple. The man's career is over. Our only job now is to make sure he doesn't take this firm down with him. The discussion was over. The fallout at the Viridian Youth Alliance was, in its own way, even more devastating. The email was opened by the executive director, a woman named Dr. Eliza Khan, a genuinely idealistic and passionate advocate who had dedicated her life to helping at-risk youth. For her, the recording was not a liability issue, it was a profound moral betrayal. She listened to it in her small, cluttered office, surrounded by children's artwork, and felt a wave of nausea. Grant Ashworth was not just a board member. He was the chair of their annual fundraising gala, a man who had given speeches about protecting the vulnerable, a man she had trusted. Within an hour, she had called an emergency session of the board's executive committee. The reaction was not the cold calculation of Apex, but one of visceral horror and existential dread. One board member, a social worker, began to cry. Their entire mission was built on a foundation of trust and safety. The idea that a man who could do that to a child was the public face of their organization was unthinkable. The consequences were immediate. Before the day was out, 2 major corporate sponsors, having been discreetly tipped off, called to indefinitely postpone their 7-figure donations. A half-dozen longtime volunteers resigned via email. Dr. Khan, her voice shaking with rage and disappointment, called Grant directly. She didn't give him a chance to speak. "I have heard the recording, Grant. You are a disgrace to everything we stand for. We are holding a vote this evening to have you removed. I suggest, for the sake of what little dignity this organization has left, that you resign before that happens." Grant, already reeling from the Apex suspension, tried to bluster, but her conviction was absolute. Faced with certain public humiliation, he agreed. Within 2 hours, the Viridian Youth Alliance released a statement. We have accepted the resignation of board member Grant Ashworth, who is stepping down to focus on personal matters. We thank him for his service. The carefully worded lie was a desperate attempt to obscure the ugly truth, another layer of institutional dishonesty built upon a foundation of personal cruelty. The moral accountability I sought was no longer an abstract concept. It was a wrecking ball, tearing through the very institutions that had once validated and sheltered my uncle's carefully constructed persona. As the institutional walls around Grant began to crumble, the personal attacks from the heart of the Sinclair dynasty intensified. My parents, Sterling and Vivian, were apoplectic, not because of what had happened to their granddaughter, but because their carefully managed world of power and perception was being threatened. My father's call came first. I saw his name on the screen and steeled myself, taking a deep breath before answering. There was no grating. "Willow!" His voice boomed through the phone, so loud I had to pull it away from my ear. It was the voice that had cowed me my entire life, the voice of unchecked rage and absolute authority. "What in God's name have you done?" "I told the truth," I said, my own voice quiet but firm. The tremor in my hands was still there, but it was no longer in my voice. "Truth?" he scoffed, a sound of pure derision. "You've destroyed this family. Grant has been suspended. His career, his entire life is in ruins because of your little tantrum. You have brought shame and scandal upon us all. After everything this family has given you, this is how you repay us? With betrayal?" He hit my daughter, Dad. He hit a 6-year-old child. "Oh, spare me the dramatics," he bellowed. It was a disciplinary tap. The girl was screaming her head off, embarrassing everyone. She needed to be corrected, and Grant had the guts to do what you, in your weakness, refused to do. You are selfish, Willow, a selfish, destructive girl, and you will regret this. He hung up, the line going dead with a final furious click. There was no concern for Alara, no glimmer of remorse, only rage at the damage to their reputation. My mother's call came an hour later. Her approach was different, but no less venomous. It was the cold, surgical cruelty of a passive-aggressive master. "Willow, darling," she began, her voice a silken weapon. "I am just so disappointed in you. Truly, I don't know where we went wrong in raising you." "Mom, No, let me finish," she interrupted, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Family is supposed to be a fortress. We protect our own, even when they make mistakes. What Grant did was, perhaps a bit firm. But to do this, to send this recording to his business associates, it's simply not one does. It's common. It's vulgar. You have aired our private matters for the world to see, and for what? To indulge your own sense of victimhood? He abused my child, and you and Dad laughed." The words came out flat and dead, an unassailable fact. She sighed, a sound of profound theatrical weariness. "Oh, Willow, you always overreact. It was a moment of tension, a laugh of surprise. You're twisting things to fit your own narrative. I just want you to think about the consequences. Serafina has left him. His career is over. Are you happy now? Does all this destruction make you feel powerful?" She was a master of gaslighting, of turning the victim into the perpetrator. "It makes me feel free," I said, and for the first time, I realized it was true. I ended the call, my hand steady. Their power over me was broken, but their control over the rest of the family was also slipping. As news of the fallout spread, the dam of silence and fear began to crack in other places. My cousin, Bethany, a sweet, gentle woman whom I hadn't spoken to in years, called me late one night, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "Willow, I heard what happened," she whispered. "I believe you. I've always believed you." She then confessed a long-buried memory from when she was 10 and Grant was a teenager. He had cornered her in the boathouse at the manor, twisting her arm behind her back until she cried, all because she had accidentally broken one of his model airplanes. When she told Sterling and Vivian, they had dismissed it. "Oh, Grant is just being a boy," Vivian had said. "You need to be more careful with his things, dear." Bethany had carried that casual dismissal, that invalidation of her pain, for 20 years. Another cousin, Michael, a successful architect who had always kept a safe distance from the family's core toxicity, shared a harrowing story of Grant physically intimidating him during a business disagreement years ago, backing him into a wall and snarling in his face. "I never told anyone," Michael confessed, his voice heavy with shame. "I was afraid of Sterling. I knew he'd take Grant's side, and I could lose a lot of business. That's the power they held over all of us." The stories weren't just about Grant. They were about the deep-seated, systemic issues within the family, the established patterns of unchecked aggression, the constant, suffocating enabling by my parents. The final, decisive blow to my parents' authority came from the one person they could not control, their own matriarch, Beatrice Vance. The scene was set in motion by my Uncle Arthur. He drove to Beatrice's charming, sun-drenched cottage on the edge of the estate, the encrypted USB drive feeling heavy in his pocket. He found her tending to her roses. "Arthur, what a lovely surprise," she said, her smile warm, but she saw the trouble in his eyes. Inside, over tea, he explained what he had recorded. He hesitated, his hand shaking as he held out the small digital audio player he had loaded the file onto. "I don't know if I should show you this, Mom," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. It's ugly. It's about Grant, and Vivian and Sterling." Beatrice looked at her son, her eyes full of a wisdom that came from 85 years of watching her family. "The truth is often ugly, Arthur," she said gently, "but it is always better than a beautiful lie. Let me hear it." He left her alone to listen. Beatrice sat in her favorite armchair, the one overlooking her garden, and put on the headphones. She heard the carefree song of her great-granddaughter, a sound of pure innocence. She heard the arrogant command from Grant, and then she heard the slap. It was a sound that made her flinch, her hand flying to her own chest as if she had been struck. But it was the sounds that followed that broke her heart and solidified her resolve. The satisfied chuckle of her son-in-law, Sterling, and the cold, dismissive laugh of her own daughter, Vivian. In that moment, decades of quiet observations, of dismissed concerns, of small cruelties she had witnessed and let slide, coalesced into a single horrifying truth. This wasn't an aberration. This was the culmination of a sickness she had watched fester for 50 years. She thought of her own husband, a hard man, who believed in firm discipline. She saw how that belief had been passed down, twisted, and amplified. She saw how her own daughter had not only married a man like her father, but had become an enabler of his worst instincts. She picked up the phone and called me. Her voice was not angry, but filled with a profound, weary sadness that resonated with my own. "Willow," she said, "I have heard the recording. I am so deeply, deeply sorry, my dear, for Elara, for you, for all the years we looked away." "Grandma B," I whispered, tears finally streaming down my face, not of pain, but of relief. "I tried to intervene once, long ago," she confessed, her voice a ghost of a memory. "When Vivian was a girl, her father was very harsh with her. I tried to soften him, but he told me it was not my place, that I would make her weak. I was afraid. I was a product of my time. I chose to keep the peace. I chose silence. And I see now, so clearly, that the silence was a poison. It didn't keep the peace. It just allowed the disease to spread in darkness." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "What you have done, Willow, is not destruction. It is an excavation. A painful one, yes, a necessary one. You are lancing a boil. I want you to know I stand with you." Her words were the ultimate validation, more powerful than any corporate resolution or legal victory. The matriarch, The quiet, moral pillar of the family had officially sided with the truth. Her support sent shockwaves through the remaining relatives. The carefully constructed wall of Sinclair loyalty, built on a foundation of fear and denial, had crumbled into dust. My parents were no longer the heads of a powerful dynasty. They were simply two isolated, angry people in a very large, empty house. In the midst of the chaotic fracturing of the Sinclair dynasty, a quiet, fragile, and far more important construction was taking place: the rebuilding of my daughter's spirit. Our apartment, once a bunker against the outside world, slowly transformed into a haven of healing. Dr. Eris's office, with its soft lighting and shelves of therapeutic toys, became our weekly sanctuary. The journey was slow and painstaking, measured not in weeks, but in minute victories. There was the day in a therapy session when Dr. Eris brought out a set of family dolls. Ilara picked up the girl doll and the man doll. For a long time, she just held them. Then, with a determined look on her small face, she took the man doll and placed him firmly in a wooden timeout box in the corner of the room. "You were mean," she whispered to the doll. "You have to stay there until you learn to be kind." Dr. Eris caught my eye and gave me a small, encouraging nod. It was the first time Ilara had asserted control over the narrative, the first sign that she was moving from victim to survivor. Her voice returned to her in whispers. I would catch her humming softly to her stuffed animals when she thought I wasn't listening. Then, one afternoon, while we were baking cookies, an activity that had become our grounding ritual, I was humming a lullaby. Ilara, concentrating intently on stirring the chocolate chips, softly, tentatively, began to hum along with me. It was barely audible, a faint, fragile sound, almost a breath, but it was there. I felt tears spring to my eyes, but I didn't dare stop, for fear of breaking the spell. We hummed the whole song together, in a wobbly, two-part harmony. The true breakthrough, the moment the sun finally broke through the darkest clouds, came almost 6 months after the incident. I was tucking her into bed, the moonlight spilling through her window and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She was quiet for a long time, and then she whispered, her voice small but clear, "Mommy, can I sing you a song?" Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the edges of her sweet, precious face. "Of course, my sweet pea," I choked out, my voice thick with an overwhelming wave of love and relief. "I would love that more than anything." And she sang. It was a little off-key, as a 6-year-old song often is, but it was delivered with a pure, unadulterated joy that filled the entire room, a powerful light that chased away every lingering shadow. It was a simple children's rhyme about a little bird who had been scared but learned to fly and sing again. It was the most beautiful, triumphant sound I had ever heard. It wasn't just a song, it was a resurrection. Grant's attempt to silence her had, in the end, inadvertently given voice to generations of suppressed truths, proving that true strength lies not in domination, but in standing firm in one's own truth and fiercely protecting the vulnerable. My own transformation was just as profound. The timid, self-sacrificing woman who had spent her life bending to the will of others was gone. In her place stood a fiercely protective, morally driven, and unapologetically assertive advocate. This seismic shift wasn't just internal, it reverberated through every single aspect of my life. My career at Prism Creative Solutions, the vibrant marketing agency where I worked, flourished. I remember the first big meeting after the fallout. I was presenting a new campaign idea, something I normally would have done with nervous deference. But this time, I spoke with a clarity and conviction that surprised even myself. When a senior partner challenged one of my points, I didn't back down. I calmly and firmly defended my position with data and passion. The room went quiet. After the meeting, my boss pulled me aside. "Willow," she said, a new respect in her eyes.
That was brilliant. I've never seen you so confident. I wasn't seeking their approval anymore, and in that freedom, I had finally earned their respect. More importantly, I found a new purpose. I began volunteering at local support groups for families dealing with emotional abuse. The first time I spoke, my voice trembled as I shared a small part of my story. But then a woman came up to me afterward, her eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "Thank you. I thought I was alone." That connection, that shared humanity, was more healing than any revenge. My narrative, once a source of deep personal shame and pain, became a tool for connection, validation, and empowerment. I found my purpose in helping others find their own voices. The architects of our pain were left to rot in the ruins of the world they had built. Grant Ashworth, the prominent executive, was now a pariah. After a few pathetic attempts to rebrand himself as a consultant, he faded into obscurity, his name a permanent stain in the business community.
He was a ghost haunting the opulent parties he could no longer attend. Sterling and Vivian were left with their shattered facade, rattling around the cold, empty halls of Willowbrook Manor. Their power, which had always been derived from fear and the perception of influence, was gone. Their social circle evaporated. The phone stopped ringing. Many relatives now openly shunned them. They were trapped together in the gilded cage they had so carefully constructed, their bitterness and inability to acknowledge their wrongs their only companions. The grand, imposing estate, once a symbol of their power, now held an air of cold, dusty emptiness. The annual family gathering, the cornerstone of their carefully cultivated image, had ceased to exist, a casualty of the truth. Life for Ilara and me became smaller, quieter, and infinitely richer. The bitterness of the past was still there, a faint, silvery scar that would always remind me of the battles fought, but it no longer defined us. It was a part of our story, but it was not the whole story. One sunny afternoon, about a year after I sent the email, Ilara and I were in a local park. She was on a swing, soaring higher and higher, her blonde hair flying out behind her like a golden cape. And she was singing. Her voice was not quiet or hesitant. It was loud, clear, and utterly free, a beacon of resilience that echoed across the playground, a sound of pure, untarnished joy. I watched her, my heart full to bursting, and knew with every fiber of my being that this was never about vengeance. It was about liberation. We had broken the cycle. We were free. The truth, once our most dangerous and terrifying secret, had become our liberation. It had become our song. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking and subscribing for more journeys of truth and transformation.